right, we're off and running on the Krug Show. Hope everybody's having a great day. It is August the 13th, and Andrew Fillipponi, who covers the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's a great follow at the Pony Express on Twitter. He is with us. We're going to talk a little bit about Brandon Aiyuk. Is he going to the Steelers? Is he staying with the Niners? Lots of different reports. Andrew, thank you for your time. You said about, 6 weeks ago that Aiyuk was headed to the Steelers, so you could be on the verge of being very, very right.
Well, Larry, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on the show with you. I've been familiar with your work for a while. Actually, back when our baseball team here in Pittsburgh was relevant in 2014, I used to listen to you guys a lot, and I always loved how passionate you were and probably still are about the Giants. I don't know if you've lost some of that since that era of winning. But I just loved how worked up you'd get and how emotional you were about those teams. I could tell how much you cared. I was at that game in 14 when they lost the wild card game 8-0 to Bumgarner, and I was
the Crawford Grand Slam night, right?
He was the first shortstop to ever hit a grand slam in a playoff game. That had never happened in baseball history. Of course, it happened to the Pirates that they would be on the wrong end of something like that. So I loved what you guys were doing back then when the Giants were really kicking ass. So it's an honor to be on the show with you today.
Well, man, it's a pleasure to have you. And you've been all over this story. And, Niner fans, I do the pregame show and part of the pre and post show on KMBR now, and been covering this team for over a decade. And there's just so much passion for 49er football and so much frustration with Aiyuk and with the team over this entire thing. Brandon, let's go to Antonio Brown. The philosopher known as Antonio Brown once tweeted, Brandon Aiyuk wants to be a Pittsburgh Steeler and won't accept any offer from the 49ers. And the source was Aiyuk himself. What do you make? Do you think this is true? Do you think that this is a sign that the relationship between Aiyuk and the Niners may have deteriorated to an ugly level in the last 48 or 72 hours?
Yeah, I think it's hilarious that a guy who ran off the field half naked, now we have to sometimes think about him as a possible credible source when it comes to stuff. I guess, within the wide receiver community, within that group of elite athletes, maybe they still do look at him as I don't know why they would, but maybe there is some communication there. I know way less about the Steeler. I know way less, Larry, about the 49ers Aiyuk dynamic,
sure,
and way more about how the Steelers view him and what they want to do. And everything I get about the 49ers relationship with Aiyuk, it comes from one of two places. It's either how the Steelers are thinking or feeling about what's going on there, or sometimes it gets passed down from the agents. And you don't know. That's really a tough one. Who they're posturing for, where their heads are, whose side they're on. So, do I think that Brandon Aiyuk is going to refuse an offer from the 49ers that would pay him A.J. Brown money, $32 million a year? My personal opinion is I don't think he would. I mean, I don't feel like the well is so poisoned and all the bridges have been napalmed to the point where if they stepped up their offer to that level, to that degree, he would still say, no, I want to play for the Steelers the same way he said, no, I don't want to play for the Patriots. But I do feel like if they're close, I think he would pick Pittsburgh.
It's interesting because I get the sense that maybe there's something personal going on here between the head coach and the wide receiver at this point, because it just seems like if they're close enough to a deal that if both sides were truly motivated to get that deal done, it would probably get done. The reason we wanted to have you on is that, we have a real good idea of what the Browns were offering. They said it was a second and a fifth and Amari Cooper. We know that it was probably Kendrick Bourne and maybe a second or third from New England, maybe Matt Judon. We don't know. That was some speculation, but we know nothing about what the Steelers may be offering. I think it's cute. Steeler fans are so, every guy on the team is like, you can't have that guy. You want Nick Herbig? No. It's like, This is an all-pro wide receiver. He's 26 years old. We're forgetting. But what do you think? I mean, do you have any idea of what the return may look like?
I think the Steelers feel like they've had enough leverage throughout this process where they don't have to give up one of their better players to make this trade happen, provided I always thought what would maybe force their hand would be if they felt another team was in a bidding war with them and would force them to up their offer. Like, I think Washington not being involved here is really hurting the return that San Francisco gets back in a trade, because the Steelers don't want to bid against themselves, essentially. And if he ends back in San Francisco, I think they would stomach that and have an easier time with that than if he were to go to another NFL team. But to answer your question, Larry, like, I was under the impression the entire time here that it was going to come down to draft picks, because the players the 49ers were talking about with the Steelers seemed like non-starters. And the players that the Steelers were comfortable giving up in the trade were guys that the 49ers really didn't want.
Let's go through those names if we could.
Sure.
So let the first group first. Who were the names that you were hearing the 49ers wanted from Pittsburgh?
Going all the way back to around the draft, so talking about mid-April, late April, George Pickens came up from the 49ers perspective. I heard Pat Freiermuth was another guy who's a tight end who's in the last year of his deal, but he's more like a wide receiver. He can't block at all,
right?
But there's receiver qualities there that I'm guessing a good offensive coach, which you guys have, might be able to fit him in and turn him into a matchup problem for teams around the NFL, the way that this team has failed to do so for the first part of this guy's career. So those are the two guys. I think Alex Highsmith, I don't have this for sure, Larry, but I would not be shocked if the 49ers also inquired about him. I mean, there's some question because of the 3-4 versus 4-3 defensive, philosophies. But I know with him, I just think let me put it this way. I think if the 49ers were more open and receptive to trading Aiyuk back in April, and they said, we need Alex Highsmith to make this trade happen, I think the Steelers might have gone for it. But I think what Tomlin doesn't want to have to do is go into a locker room here a month before the season starts and say, good news, bad news. We just got an all-pro wide receiver, but we had to give up like our third best defensive player to make that happen. And I don't think he wants to have to look TJ Watt and Cam Hayward and guys like that in the eye and say, we had to give up this very, very, very important part of our deal. Well, that's relative, but that subjective too. But we had to give up a guy that's beloved here to make this trade happen. So those are the guys I think San Francisco wanted initially. I don't know why they would still think they could get Pickens now, by the way. I don't think that was ever something that the Steelers ever entertained, even though Pickens has had his fair share of drama and kind of histrionics and all that kinds of crap here. And then as far as guys, I think the Steelers are trying to sell the 49ers on.
Yeah.
I had heard James Daniels, who's a guard who's going into the last year of his contract, who's a nice player, not a great player or anything like that.
Is he holding off Mason McCormick at right guard? Because I know McCormick is a hell of a player. He's an FCS player.
Yeah. So I think what would happen there, Larry, is they probably start Nate Herbig at that guard spot.
Right.
What they would have done, because I don't think the 49ers are going to take James Daniels. But what I think would have happened was Herbig would have played guard, and eventually at some point this season or at the latest the start of next year, McCormick would become the starter there. And they've effectively told Daniels, we're not interested in doing business with you beyond this year, because they like that guy they drafted in the 4th round that much. So there's Daniels, there's Calvin Austin, who I think had 17 catches last year, had a 75-yard touchdown against the Raiders in week 3. They haven't been able to figure out how to use him. He's very small. He's very tiny, but his claim to fame is that Sauce Gardner said when he was at Cincinnati, that was the hardest wide receiver that he had to cover in college. So that always gets recited and brought back up when we talk about the pros and cons of the guy. And then Dan Moore Jr., who so far has only been a left tackle. He claims he can't play right tackle. And it's a guy that the Steelers have been trying to replace in every draft, but seemingly can't get out of their lineup. He is like a cockroach who survives a nuclear winter because he has a million lives with his coaching staff and might end up starting week 1 again. So those were the guys I heard the Steelers tried to sell the 49ers on, and I don't think their football people were that impressed with any of those dudes.
Well, but now it's been reported that the Niners and Steelers have agreed to compensation. And then, we've heard it all. I mean, from the Niner perspective, they're in their Super Bowl window, and the same way it's going to be hard for Mike Tomlin or Omar Khan to, deliver bad news about good players that are leaving Pittsburgh. It's going to be a hard sell trading Brandon Aiyuk inside the Niners Super Bowl window for draft picks that won't be, realized until April of 2025. In fact, I almost think that's maybe a non-starter, to be completely honest. I think the 49ers they could take a draft pick, but they got to have a player coming back, I think, to make this a reality or make this palatable at all for them. And to make, the Trent Williamses, the George Kittles, the Nick Bosas, not freak out to Shanahan because they're losing a great player. What do you think? What are you hearing? Do you think it will be draft picks? And there, then the other speculation is that maybe what's taken the last 3 days or 4 days is that maybe the Niners are looking, if they are getting draft picks for a third team, that they could spin those picks to for a receiver.
Yeah, I always thought the second part of that, the wide receiver thing, the 49ers needing to incorporate a third team or to find another wide receiver on another team before they made this trade. I think there's a lot of people here that think, Larry, that the owner on San Francisco's end has held up this deal, that the football people on both sides have been ready to make this happen since I brought it up last week that it was done, and that there's something in San Francisco that goes beyond Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch that are making this a very difficult trade to pull off. Because you mentioned Shanahan's frustrations with what's gone on. And I think that they drafted a player in the first round and also brought Jennings back to prepare for life without Aiyuk. Now, maybe they did think that they were going to get a good player that they could use either at wide receiver or another position in a trade when they got started down this road. Or maybe they thought they could convince Aiyuk to go to one of these other places that wasn't Pittsburgh and get a better return back. But, I just don't think the Steelers ever thought that one of the things that was going to be a monkey wrench would be trying to get a third team into a trade. This is not the Major League Baseball winter meetings, Larry. Like, it's just how many, I don't have this off the top, but how many 3-team trades have there been in NFL history?
Maybe none.
Right. So like that just seems almost nonsensical that two very bright, astute general managers would have a conversation and say, well, now we need a third team to get involved. I'm a little bit perplexed by that part of this whole saga and soap opera that's gone on. I think the Steelers feel like they don't have to make the best, that they've never had to make the best trade offer because it didn't seem like it was realistic that Aiyuk would be back in San Francisco on a long-term deal. And they knew through conversations with his agent that he was not going to want to go and play in New England or Cleveland. So I think that that's the way they've conducted their business the entire time. They're not going to be pressured into doing something that they ultimately don't want to do. They look at, for them, Larry, they look at the thing that is the most prohibitive about this deal, not entirely prohibitive, but the thing that is the biggest component of this is paying Aiyuk. And they don't want to do this double whammy where they give up a lot in trade compensation and then have to turn around and make him like the 5th or 6th highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. And they think they have cooperation from Aiyuk's people to make a deal like that happen.
Pittsburgh, what do you think Pittsburgh's financial offer is going to look like to Aiyuk? Do you have a good idea of what they're offering contract-wise?
I do. I do. I've heard repeatedly that it's 4 years and it's between 28 and 29 million dollars a year.
Wow. And do you have an idea of where the Niners offer came in ultimately?
I don't. I mean, I heard all the reporting from a few weeks ago that $26 million a year was their final offer and that they weren't going to go above that. So, I mean, clearly, well, I was going to say clearly things have changed, but I'm not sure. You know, one of my pet peeves with this whole story is that I think the Niners have done a very good job of getting their narrative and their agenda out there. I mean, literally, Matt Mayoko, who's one of the best reporters in football, said that the Steelers were out of it and that it was New England, and here's what New England offered, and here's what Cleveland offered. And I just thought that, Larry, that was, you know, if we do end up trading Aiyuk to Pittsburgh for less than these two deals, that was just put out there to make Aiyuk look like the bad guy, so fans didn't freak out on John Lynch. They still would, but maybe not nearly as bad if they knew he could have actually made a better trade, but it was the player who refused to go there. So there's just been, I mean, there's a chance what we're talking about right now in an hour is completely dated because of just how insane this trade has been, or trade talks have been. Like, I thought it was interesting today that we're talking on Tuesday night. I thought it was interesting that Schefter basically just sat out the day. I don't know if you noticed that.
Right.
Like we have Rappaport, we have Rossini, we have all these huge insiders like, oh, this is the new twist, this is the new component of it. The dude was on TV like 5 days today and apparently just didn't want to talk about it. How is that possible?
Well, maybe he just doesn't feel like he's got a good feel, and these guys really keep a tight scorecard.
Maybe. Well, then you know what? He should say that then. I think that would be interesting. You know, like the fact that he's been mum on this now since he went on McAfee's show and looked like he was being held hostage by them and looked like he hadn't eaten a good meal in like 48 hours. Like it looked like it was like physically draining for him to have to continue to talk about this. Like he has been beaten down, I feel like, by this story, like many of us have been.
Exactly. Let me ask you this. Why do you think Aiyuk prefers the Steelers to the Niners? You know, I mean, the Niners had the better team last year. They played head to head. They beat them up pretty good. Is it money? Is it more attention, more production? I mean, the 49ers Steelers have a great tradition, but 49ers seem to be the better team. They're the favorite to win the Super Bowl. Why do you think he prefers Pittsburgh?
I've got two thoughts on that. I think one of them is, you know, an intense desire to want to feel wanted. I mean, if you watch peers, McCaffrey gets an extension, you watch guys around you get paid, you don't on your own team, makes you feel like they've prioritized those guys ahead of you. But then also here come guys who you think at your own position you're better than. They seem to have no issue getting re-signed and extended by their own team for a lot of money, and yet you're haggling over $26 million while Jalen Waddle and, you know, Amon-Ra St. Brown and these guys get close to 30. I think that probably makes him want to go to a team that is going to pay him and let him know that we do indeed value that way. And then I think the other part of it is, Larry, like, I mean, I think he wants a cool boss. I think he wants a Mike Tomlin. I think he, for whatever reason, has like other players, Justin Fields, Patrick Queen this offseason. They want to play for this guy. Now, he's a great soundbite to people outside of Pittsburgh. And, you know, he hasn't had a losing season, which gets regurgitated. I feel like, it's almost a requirement for anyone that does the Steelers game to say that during a broadcast. But the offensive production has been awful. The guy really has had enormous problem finding effective offensive coaching for years since Todd Haley left. And he hasn't won a playoff game since 2016. So it's confounding. Right. It's confounding to me that in NFL circles, the bloom hasn't come off his rose as much as it has for people like myself who have been around the situation for as long as I've been. Like, he seems to have taken no dents, no hits at all for the fact that his team really, for a long time in NFL terms, has been an irrelevant franchise. So to your point, it's clearly not about winning or about fitting into, this high-powered offense or anything like that, because the Steelers have neither right now. And even though there's optimism about what Arthur Smith brings to the table, I don't think anybody here is sitting back thinking that the Steelers are going to jump in next year and be one of the best offenses in the NFL, even if they do add Brandon Aiyuk.
If Aiyuk is a Steeler, who's going to be throwing him the football? And I wonder who he prefers to be throwing him the football. I watched the preseason game against the Texans. Justin Fields was god-awful in that game. I mean, he made a couple business decisions that Cam Newton would have signed off on a couple of those fumbles. Who's going to be the quarterback in Pittsburgh? Is it going to be Russell or is it going to be Fields?
It'll be Russell Wilson to start the year. I unless this calf injury, which they've already been somewhat dishonest about. I mean, they tried to play it off like it was no big deal. It is one of the dumbest sports injuries I've ever heard of in my entire life covering football. They changed their fitness test before training camp because they hired a college strength and conditioning staff from Boston College. And I think they did that because Mike Tomlin's son is a football player at Boston College. I see no other reason why Tomlin would go to that specific college to hire those types of people. And so they went from what was just an old school, let's run up and down the field and kind of get the juices going fitness test, to let's now start pushing sleds everywhere. And their 36-year-old quarterback got hurt doing that, and is now finally taking part in full-fledged team drills into the third week and final week of training camp. But, based on the promises they made to Wilson, cajoling him to come here on a 1-year minimum deal, I think that Tomlin would look like he wouldn't lose, obviously, his credibility with everyone, but to bench a guy who you said you're going to come here and be the starter because of an injury that his own training staff is responsible for Justin Fields, who, as you pointed out, Larry, did not have a great preseason game. I mean, I just think the optics there would not be good for him. So I think they'll start Wilson. I don't think it'll be a long leash. But to what you were saying before, if I had to guess, I think Aiyuk would actually be more interested in playing with Fields than with Wilson. I mean, they're about the same age. The thing that Fields does that I think people like Aiyuk gravitate to is if you get on your phone, if you're online, when the guy plays in an NFL game, he's going to do one or two things that make people say, holy bleep. He just does. Whether it's a 70-yard run or whether he hits someone in stride and it's a 40-yard bomb that hits someone right in the numbers. He does those things, but then there's, another 35 plays that leave you scratching your head. So, I'm optimistic about Fields. I do think that there's great talent there, but, I do have concerns based on how the rest of the league viewed the guy. I mean, the Steelers got him for a conditional 6th-round pick, but if I had to guess, I would say Aiyuk would probably be more interested in Fields than he would Wilson.
What do you think the time frame is on this deal?
Oh, God. Man, that is a great question, Larry. I mean,
can we get a solution?
Well, here's the thing about that, right? So the Steelers have long had a team policy going back to the early 90s where they don't negotiate deals in season with players. They have not signed a player on the roster to an extension in season since prior to the adoption of NFL free agency, going back to like 94. So, or 93. So I can't see them trading for him and then giving him this deal in like week 3. So they have a very firm artificial deadline on this thing, which I think would be September 7th. So, that's a long time from now. In a way, if it takes that long, I'll be fine with it because that means it will actually have happened and they'll get a good football player. But at the same time, I don't know, man. I don't think if it drags on that long, are the Steelers comfortable playing that game of chicken? And if they don't get him, well, then they're completely naked at wide receiver. They will have done nothing outside of behind George Pickens. I think if this goes another 2 weeks, they'd have to start thinking about alternatives and plan Bs, guys that are maybe not on the best of terms with their current teams and trying to trade for them before they potentially get cut. So I don't know, man. Like, I would have told you maybe this morning that this trade was going to get done based on some of the reporting that was out there, but I don't have a firm grip on this whatsoever. I don't know how you could. How could anybody say right now with any degree of certainty that it's going to happen today, tomorrow, or next week, or ever?
That's a good point. Two last ones for you. If the Niners do get a draft pick back, any idea what receiver they may go hunting for? Cortland Sutton, T. Higgins, Devontae Adams is the guy everybody wants here. Any guesses?
Well, I know Cortland. I mean, a lot of these guys are names that Steelers fans and we've obsessed over because we were, doing the same thing, searching and scouring for wide receivers and have been all offseason. Sutton got new money or a restructuring of his deal in Denver. So I don't see him leaving there unless it's like a mid-season trade where potentially the bottom could fall out of that team season fast and they dump him. But I don't think that would happen before the start of the season. Man, I don't see Adams going anywhere but the Jets. I don't see the Bengals trading T. Higgins. I think they actually, believe it or not, have someone that is fine with doing what Aiyuk doesn't want to do, which is let me play out this final year. Let's try to win, and then I'll be the top wide receiver in the 2025 free agent market. So I don't see that happening. It's thin, man. Like, if there were a robust number of really good wide receivers out there, Larry, I think the Steelers would have just said the hell with this Aiyuk situation, and they would have just gone and acquired that guy themselves. They would have said, what the heck? I mean, we can't get a decision from you. We can't get an answer from you. We'll just go get this other wide receiver that's out there being dangled around. I just don't think many of those guys exist at the moment.
No, it's a good point. Blitzberg, I don't know much about that media source, but Blitzberg says the 49ers asked for Minka, Pickens, or Freiermuth plus a second or a third.
Blitzberg.
I mean, that would be an incredible haul. Who is give me the player that the Steeler fans would riot if he was in this trade?
Oh man.
Outside of the obvious stuff. I mean, outside of TJ Watt and all these guys.
Okay, so you don't want Minka Fitzpatrick, you don't want TJ Watt, you want somebody that is kind of a fan favorite and maybe not a total household name kind of deal. That's a good question, Larry. You know what? I think that they've got a couple of guys on their lines that fans would feel that way about. Benton is a defensive tackle who had a very good rookie year from Wisconsin. And I think even though he plays in their 3-4 inside and not end, I think there's a feeling inside the organization, and fans saw glimpses of it and peaks of it too, where Hayward is going to ride off into the sunset and he's going to be their next really good to great defensive lineman. So I think that would have people in a tizzy. I would not be thrilled with that. And then on the offensive line, there's just such high expectations for the tackles that they've drafted in the last couple of years with Jones and with Fautanu from Washington, who they brought in. So those are some of the bigger name guys. I mean, there's fan favorites like Peyton Wilson, who they just drafted, an inside linebacker, Zach Frazier, a center, who they have super high expectations for. So guys like that, I think if fans found out we're in the deal, they'd be like, okay, it's cool. We've got a guy that's probably good for 1,200 yards and 7 or 8 touchdowns, but crap, we just gave away this guy that might be a NFL starter for 8 or 9 seasons and go to Pro Bowls and all pros and all that stuff.
I'll leave you with this. I think that it's likely to be like a James Daniels or a Dan Moore and like a 3rd round pick. I think the 49ers would want Nick Herbig or Highsmith because they badly need a defensive end. I personally would want Zach Frazier or Peyton Wilson. I saw Wilson in that game the other night. Oh my God, 41. He's running around. He was everywhere. And Frazier is just a destroyer. I mean, Frazier is going to be an awesome center for a decade. I'd take Wilson or Frazier in a heartbeat. I can't imagine the Steelers would move him, but I do think the Niners probably I could see a Herbig or a Highsmith just because the Niners lost Drake Jackson and they need a defensive end.
So, back in March and April, I brought Herbig's name up as a guy that I thought would be a good fit as the player part of the trade because of what you just said there. And I think that he has the potential to be a double-digit sack guy. He's just blocked by a first ballot Hall of Famer and somebody who they gave big money to, who 2 years ago was, a double-digit sack guy in his own right, in Highsmith. The feedback I got on Herbig was he would be for the 49ers too small to play end. And they'd have to figure out, do they beef him way up? There was some thought that he would actually play linebacker in a 4-3 out of the draft. I mean, he's a
D end. He's a D end. I mean, he's an edge rusher. But you're right. Niners usually like 270-pound defensive ends. He's closer to 250, but he's damn good. Highsmith would be a great fit, but I can't imagine they'd want to move him. Moon, actually, who the kid Moon with the long arms had a beautiful sack against the Texans. What do you think of Moon?
He was a Raven, and they barely played him. And I think they thought so little of Moon that they brought Marcus Golden out of mothballs to come back and play. He was very good last year as a third, fourth edge guy. And the dude just went to camp for 2 days, said, F this, and retired abruptly on them.
Right.
So I don't think Moon really factored into their plans and was a candidate to end up on their practice squad before Golden quit. But, maybe he sneaks back in now. The one, if the player gets traded, the one dark horse name I'll give you.
Yeah, give me a dark horse.
Is DeMarvin Leal, who was a third-round pick from Texas A&M.
Yeah, I like him.
They just have not found a way to use him correctly. They drafted him as someone that they viewed as more of a Cam Hayward type, but his rookie year,
crazy long arms. I mean, ridiculous long arms.
Freakish athlete, can do backflips and stuff for a man his size. He ended up playing a lot of edge, and he played all over the place in their first preseason game. And he's one of these guys where, now you're hearing stories of he was never really in shape. He never really took it seriously. And he actually showed up at training camp this year with a man on a mission, actually motivated to make something of his NFL career and his talent. So, they screwed up on the other line. They had Kevin Dotson, who was a really talented guy. They played him out of position. They traded him to the Rams for next to nothing. The guy ended up being one of the best guards in the NFL, and he got a huge payday from LA. Maybe Leal is the defensive equivalent of that for a team like San Francisco if they try to sneak him into the deal in a package with like a second-round pick and a fourth-round pick there.
Yeah. No, I like that name. And I saw him in this game. He had a sack, and he's got ridiculous long arms. I'm an A&M fan, so I've seen Leal before. He's been disappointing coming into this year. But as you said, the physical ability is clearly there. Andrew, promote anything you got, man. I know you're rolling. You've been all over the story. You're on the radio. You're on television. You're everywhere, man. Tell people who are big Krug Show fans and follow the Niners, if they want to follow you, how they can.
Yeah, so now this is a little bit in limbo right now because my partner on this show just got another job. So I'm promoting something that is a little bit not on shaky ground, but it's going to get changed up a little bit here very soon. Podcast, it's called First and Pod, 1ST and ampersand POD. We have a podcast, myself and Danny Parkins from Chicago.
Yeah, no,
670 The Score. And it's a really neat concept that we've done for 3 years now. Thursdays and Sundays we tape. On Thursdays we recap Thursday night football, and then it's quick previews on every game. And then on Sunday we recap every game, and it's a digestible 30 to 40 minute podcast that if you're going somewhere, it just gives you analysis on each week in the NFL. We do it in the off season, and it gets a little bit different in terms of format, but that's what we do from September all the way through to the end of the season. And you can get that everywhere people get podcasts. I understand there's hundreds of national football podcasts out there, but the thing I like about this one is it's not just 25 minutes on Dak Prescott. It's not 40 minutes on Mike McCarthy. It's not only Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. It's not only polarizing, is Lamar Jackson a great quarterback. It's here's every game, and here's just some, very pointed, hopefully thoughtful comments on each game. So I'd love it if people gave that a try, Larry.
Hey, man, thanks for jumping on the Krug show. We love having guests like yourself on. And when I saw that you were breaking this story and you were all over it, I'm like, good, man. Good that a true radio guy would be all over this. But thanks for the hustle. Thanks for jumping on the Krug show, giving us the knowledge, and hopefully when the deal's consummated, maybe next week or next year or maybe 10 years from now, we'll get you back on.
If you just, hey, I still think about, and I know I wasn't alive for it, but I've watched it like 10 times. That game in 84 is an all-time great game. The 49ers loss from that season to the Steelers, Larry, I'm sure you're very familiar with it.
You kidding me? I mean, it was a terrible call at the end. I think it was a PI on the goal line, wasn't it?
So what ended up happening was Stallworth caught a touchdown over Ronnie Lott to tie the game. And then Montana threw an interception with 3 minutes left.
That's what it was.
To Brian Hinkle.
Yeah.
And the Steelers ended up kicking a field goal. But then Montana, in true Montana form, by the way, I live like 10 minutes away from where the guy grew up.
In the Monongahela Valley there? Are you close to the Monongahela?
There is a great breakfast spot that's, like halfway from where he used to throw his football through that tire swing constantly and where I live. But anyways, yeah, so he drove them right back downfield, and I think Wershing missed the kick, like a 25-yarder or something like that. Ridiculous. That would have sent the game to overtime. But whatever, you guys got the last laugh. You beat Danny Marino in the Super Bowl that year, and Danny Marino's nephew used to be my producer.
Really?
So yeah.
The fact that the Steelers bypassed Marino for Easton, no, not for Easton, for
Senor Sack was their
That's
pick
right.
in that
Yes.
draft. And then
who got into a terrible accident, I believe, after that, right? Rivera.
Yes. Yeah. And then they ended up the whole thing was a disaster. But look, I mean, people here really believe that's had a big that really convinced Art Rooney to push for Kenny Pickett because they had made the Marino gaffe with a local guy and they wanted to make up for it. And instead they just compounded the issue and he's going
to wind up losing out to Tanner McKee in Philadelphia for the backup job.
Although he was
Hurts.
doing Kenny things in the first preseason game. He threw his touchdown pass and didn't turn it over and has Eagles fans convinced that he could actually be.
Hey, man, thanks for jumping on. We really appreciate you. Have a great night. And we wish you nothing but success. Thanks again, man.
See you, brother.
Andrew Fillipponi. Fantastic on the Krug show. Thanks to Kev for chasing that down. Kev asked me earlier today. He's like, Niners have the off day. What do you want to do? And I'm like, I want you to get Andrew Fillipponi from Pittsburgh on the Krug show tonight. And so Kev sent him an email and said, hey, Andrew, how about the Krug show tonight? And he's like, absolutely, man. I did radio today. I did television. I will jump on the Krug show and I'll rap with you about this Aiyuk to the Steelers trade. I do feel like we advanced the story there a little bit. Not really the story, but at least the options for the 49ers. I do think that Andrew hit on DeMarvin Leal as a name that would be very attractive to the 49ers. If you have NFL Plus, go watch Steelers-Texans preseason game and watch Leal. Now, Leal, I'm an A&M fan. He was great at A&M. He hasn't done it in the pros, but he's 6'4", 290 with just ridiculously long arms. I mean, this guy may have the longest wingspan of all time, and he really can play some defensive end. So now I think if you ask Chris Kasarik, he would rather have a 290-pound guy with bend and speed off the edge than to play a 240-pound guy. They just don't like 200. They want to set the edge in the wide nine with guys who are 270 plus. This guy's 290. This is a guy who's going to play inside on passing downs, and or I should say, he might be able to play outside on some passing downs. But he's another guy who could play inside as well. He could be an interior rusher. He could be an outside rusher. If you want to go to that, that kind of a bear front, and the Niners may use the bear front. They've been practicing it quite a bit. A guy like DeMarvin Leal, who wears 98 for the Steelers, would be interesting. Very, very, very interesting. All right, let's hit a couple of the chats here, and then we'll tell you about our sponsor. Daza jumps in. How can the Niners expect a king's ransom from the Steelers yet be unwilling to pay BA like a true number one wide receiver? Well, that's a good point. By the way, for some of you who are like, hey, your mic and this and that and the audio issues, it was because the guest didn't have headphones in. So you got a little bit of that echo, and I hope it wasn't too bad for you guys, but I apologize. He asked me early on, he said, I don't have any headphones on. I should have said, do you have any headphones? Instead, I didn't. I just said, hey, no problem. Let's just roll. But yeah, once we got into it, I realized, you know what? I wish he had some headphones. You learn, you live and you learn. You live and you learn. So hopefully you guys could make out the audio when I was talking. This live stream, by the way, is sponsored by Better, the official daily fantasy sponsor of the Krug Show. Use Better to make daily fantasy lineups and win real money. Download the app below. Make sure you use the promo code Niners to get the first deposit matched up to $250. All right. Now we are going to go, and what are we going to do? We're going to do, let's see here. Let me go full screen so I can see this. There we go. Rushing touchdowns. Let's go rushing touchdowns. Christian McCaffrey, all rushing yards. All rushing yards. Christian McCaffrey, 1,150.5 rushing yards for McCaffrey. I'm going to go under. I think they're going to get him off the field. I think they're going to use other people. I'm going to say less. I'm going to say less than 1,150.5 rushing yards for Christian McCaffrey. Let's go Derrick Henry, 975.5 rushing yards. I like more. I think Derrick Henry is going to have a big year in Baltimore. I think Derrick Henry is going to be huge there. I like him a lot. Who else? Let's see. Zamir White. No, let's go further down the list. There's A-Chain. You know what? I like Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones, because they're going to either have McCarthy or Darnold, and those guys are going to struggle. They're going to focus on running. And I think 750.5 rushing yards for Aaron Jones is a good number. I like that over. So over for Aaron Jones. Who else is on this list? Kamara. Najee was up top, huh? Let's go back. Can we go back up to the top? Najee was up top. I want to see what Najee's number's at. Najee's number is 825.5 rushing yards. I think the Steelers are going to run the ball. I really do. I love the offensive linemen they've drafted. I think they're good, really good run blocking offensive linemen. I think they're going to want to take pressure off Russell. I think Russell helps the running game. I like Najee over 825.5 rushing yards. All right, so there you go. Those are my guys. I'm going to go. Let's wager 100. Let's wager 100. There we go. That's 10. Can I go? Can I wager more than 10? Like to wager more than 10, possibly. No, Kev's just saying we're gonna go with 10. All right, so we have 10. If we go 4 for 4, we win $555. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Kind of like that. So there you go. If we go 5 for 5, we're gonna do pretty well. So there you go. And of course, we should tell you this live stream is sponsored by Better, the official daily fantasy sponsor of the Krug Show. Use Better to make daily fantasy lineups and win real money. Download the app below. Make sure you use the promo code Niners to get the first deposit matched up to $250. help support the Krug Show. Download the app below. Make sure you use that promo code Niners to get your first deposit matched up to $250. Who doesn't want $250 free dollars? There you go. All right, a couple thoughts from the stream tonight. First of all, we have the 1-star chat from Daza. How can the Niners expect a king's ransom from the Steelers yet be unwilling to pay BA like a true number one wide receiver? I wanted to talk more about that. Because they are on the verge of paying Brock Purdy 60 times what he's making right now. So they have severe cap problems. There is no player in pro football that's going to jump in salary more than Brock Purdy's going to jump from this year to next year. And so they're getting ready for it. And, let's be honest about the way things have gone. The 49ers have almost a quarter of the top 30 players in the NFL. There's 32 teams in the NFL. The NFL had their top 100 list. The Niners had 13 of the top 30. When you have 13 players in the top 30, you have nearly 25% of the players, of the best players in the top 30. I mean, that's that, you're living right, but in a cap sport, you got to make tough decisions. So that's, and the receiver position, this is not just a 49er problem. This is an everybody problem. The receiver position has become a very difficult position to deal with. Why? Because supply and demand. There's a great demand for the best guys, but there's also a great supply. The last 3 drafts have been loaded with wide receivers. They're good. There's good wide receivers everywhere. There's going to be a bunch of good wide receivers who probably get cut. They're not great wide receivers, but there's good wide receivers everywhere. So it's not like quarterback. It's quarterback. Larry's husband, says Larry, turning his fans into gambling addicts. Thank you. Yes. Beware. Well, I won't read that one. But anyway, I just think that there's a lot going on here. I think it may be a little personal. It may be a little bit just tied to the fact that the Niners feel like they can replace the wide receivers. Debo's probably not a long-time guy either. He'll probably get replaced. The thing about it, though, and the reason I was kind of on the side of pay Aiyuk, and I would have extended for Aiyuk and trimmed roster spots elsewhere. But, the more I watch, I'll say this, the more I watch Deommodore Lenoir, and he's a free agent next year, the more I think I want to keep that guy. That guy's an awesome corner. He's playing great. He's getting better every day. So, if you had Aiyuk, you probably can't have Lenoir. So a lot of these discussions are not really framed the right way, but that's probably reality. Reality is next year, Banks and Mooney and Lenoir are all free agents. And if you sign Aiyuk to the big money extension this year, you can kiss those guys goodbye. And that's just the way it is. So what do you want? Now, I would side with Aiyuk. I would take a chance and kissing those guys goodbye because I've got Renardo Green and I've got Darrell Luter and I've got Sammy Womack and I've got, some other guys at corner. And I don't know, that they have a replacement wide receiver that approaches what Brandon Aiyuk contributes and what he produces. So, I probably would go with Aiyuk. The other reason I would extend for Aiyuk is that, to me, you can't blame Aiyuk because the Niners pass the ball at the 32nd rate in the NFL. No team in the NFL passes less than the San Francisco 49ers. Brandon Aiyuk did not cause that and is not the reason for that, and he has no control over that. And yet that suppresses his numbers. That the fact of the matter is the Niners throw the ball the least, and they run the ball the most. So that's one thing. That's one drag on his numbers. The other drag on his numbers, and if you've heard this before, I apologize, is the fact that the 49ers play the 28th fastest pace in the league. They play a very slow pace. So when you play a slow pace, there's less plays. When there's less plays, there's less yards. There's less yards, there's less production, and less for everybody to go around. So, that's a big part of it. Nothing to do with Aiyuk, and yet it suppresses his numbers. And, he's on a team that has all these weapons that are awesome. And so you throw in, you're one of a bunch of great weapons, and you play at a slow pace, and you run the ball, a ton compared to how often you pass. And those are three major elements that all are dragging down Aiyuk's numbers, none of which he has any control over. And I just feel like if I was going to extend, I would extend for a wide receiver. If I was a running football team like the Niners, I would extend for a great wide receiver who also excelled in the run game as a blocker. And that's what Brandon Aiyuk represents. He represents a great wide receiver who also excels in the run game as a blocker. If the guy was a diva or a me guy, it would be one thing, but he ain't. He's a team guy and a tough guy. So I don't know what to say. All I got to say is that I hope the return's decent. I really don't want to see him go, but if he's going to go, I hope the return's decent. You say, what's a decent return? DeMarvin Leal and DeMarvin Leal, James Daniels, and a second-round pick. Offensive lineman, defensive lineman, second-round pick. Maybe you could flip the second-round pick to Denver if you could turn that into DeMarvin Leal on defense, James Daniels on offense, and Cortland Sutton. I think that would be a really nice save. You would get, an offensive lineman that helps you, a defensive lineman that helps you, and a replacement receiver that has some talent and some upside. So that's what I would do. The other name that I threw out earlier this week, and I can't imagine the Niners would go there, but there are some rumblings out of Minnesota that the Vikings may move Jordan Addison because of his driving issues that he's had, where he's driving too fast, and he's had some issues with the law, a couple of them. And then if they lost Kyrie Jackson, their rookie, to an auto accident death, not involving any of their players, or not involving this player. But he's Addison's an incredible talent. We saw it firsthand when the Niners played the Vikings last year. He burned the Niners for a touchdown. To me, instead of looking for an older receiver or another receiver that's really expensive, how about a cheap young receiver and take a chance on character, or take a chance that you can get this kid, trade for Jordan Addison and get him a car service so he doesn't have to drive anymore. Obviously that's not the responsible way for him to address his issues of driving way too fast. He just needs to slow the hell down. He's got the lead foot. But I'm just saying, he's a young guy who's driving too fast. It's solvable, and he's an incredible talent. If you added Jordan Addison in a trade, let's say Steelers gave you a couple linemen and a pick, and you could flip that pick to Minnesota and get Jordan Addison. Now I'm excited. Now you've got a dynamic young receiver who's cheap, who's got a lot of talent. So we'll see. There could be any number of options out there, especially at the cut down. I read an article last night that the Chiefs may cut Kadarius Toney. I know Kadarius Toney's a little crazy, but you know what? Kadarius Toney in Shanahan's offense would be ridiculous. I mean, Kadarius Toney in Shanahan's offense would just be a menace. I think he would be incredible. If he's available, I want Kadarius Toney at the cut down. And I'll take a chance on Crazy and see if he can, if you can get him. I mean, the guy lined up off sides and he's done some screwball things. But his stop and start and make you miss ability is off the chain. If Kadarius Toney is available at the cut down or at the trade at the cut down via trade, maybe not, Chiefs don't ultimately cut him. They may trade him. That's another guy, big play guy that I would be very, very interested in adding. For the 49ers. I mean, let's be honest. If you lose Brandon Aiyuk, you need a big play guy. Is Pearsall nice? Yeah, Pearsall's got some nice ball skills, and he's going to move the chains a little bit, but he's not as dynamic as Aiyuk. If you lose a dynamic down the field threat like Aiyuk, I would love to see the 49ers get a dynamic down the field threat, in the form of a young receiver. Kadarius Toney would be great. Jordan Addison would be great. Anybody who's got big playability down the field potentially would be great. So Cortland Sutton would be nice. T. Higgins would be nice. So I know a lot of Niner fans would love to see Devontae Adams. I can't see Mark Davis really ever helping the 49ers. He'd rather continue to suck than do anything that helps the 49ers in any way. So I can't imagine he would participate in any deal that sends Devontae to the 49ers. All right, we've got this one. We had Dazzle. We have Michael Alanis, who says, after Andrew's interview, on a scale of 1 to 10, is BA being a Steeler? Schefter being quiet, interesting observation. Yeah, because Schefter didn't want to touch it, probably because he didn't feel like there was anything legitimate there. I would say it's 60-40 Steelers. I would say 60-40 Steelers. But the one thing in the Niners' favor, and I don't know how big of a factor this is, but I've seen baby pictures of Aiyuk wearing Niner gear, and Aiyuk's mom is supposedly a diehard, the biggest Niner fan of all time. So maybe his interest in staying with the Niners is more sincere and he's more passionate about being a 49er than we realize, because he doesn't want to let on, because he doesn't want to hurt his bargaining position. I get the sense that Aiyuk holding in was a real indication that, you know what, he wants to be a Niner. And the Garofalo report from earlier today said that, at the end of the day, Aiyuk would rather be a Niner. So I'd like resolution at some point. SS says, hey, 1999, just because I'm SS. Thank you, SS. We appreciate you. Let's read a couple more chats. Let's see what people have to say in the chat. Guys, what do you think? Do you want Aiyuk back? Do you want Aiyuk moving on? I already told you my read on it. My read is that the Steelers want to move James Daniels or Dan Moore and like a second or a third round pick, preferably, obviously, a third. I think that's what the Steelers want to move. James Daniels or Dan Moore and like a third round pick. Why? Because they've already drafted in this last draft maybe the best center, guard, and tackle in the draft, and they're fortified with young guys who can play. So they're not worried about those guys leaving. So I think that's their pitch. I think the Niners' ask is probably heavy on the defensive line, with either Herbig or more likely the starter opposite TJ Watt. Why does his name always escape me? Alex Highsmith. Well, I really liked Alex Highsmith at Charlotte. Good football player at Charlotte. Great get by the Steelers. Steelers have had some of the best general managers in the sport in the last few decades. Kevin Colbert. I met him once. To me, he's as good a GM as there's been. And then Omar Khan has followed in his footsteps. He's a terrific GM. They know what they're looking for. They've got a great group of scouts. Just a lot of great ones. I forget the guy's name, Mark from Blesto. Really, really great guy. I met him on the scouting trail. Steelers just have a really good organization, and they've got a really good talent base, and they're really good at the draft. And they found Highsmith in the third round in 2020. And he, in a lot of ways, is exactly what the Niners need right now. But he also is closer to 250 and is probably a little bit on the light side for what the Niners are looking for. But and so is Herbig. But DeMarvin Leal is interesting because he's a little bit of a bigger body. So I could see the Niners wanting, Highsmith or Herbig or Leal or some combination of defensive line, because they always want defensive line. I could definitely see the Niners wanting Minkah Fitzpatrick and the Steelers laughing and going, no, you will not get Minkah Fitzpatrick. I personally think that Aiyuk's a great young player. And all I would really want is he's one great young player, and all I would want is one great young player in return. And I've made that perfectly clear. In my mind, the Steelers have a couple great young players. Peyton Wilson, the third-round pick at NC State, is a phenomenal player. I mean, there's no question about that. He's going to be a really, really good NFL player. He had some great moments in this preseason game against the Texans. He had some bad moments where he looked bad and he got moved around. But he also showed unbelievable movement ability. And he's an incredible athlete at that size. So I think Peyton Wilson's great. I think Zach Frazier's great. And I think Aiyuk's great. And I'd want one of those two guys. Simple as that. I'm not saying the Steelers would want to give him, but if I was Lynch, I want Peyton Wilson or I want Zach Frazier. I don't need a bevy of picks. I don't need some package of picks, but I do need a great young player. I'm giving a great young player. I need to be getting a great young player. And I know the Steelers are like, hey, look, we're footing the bill on the contract. And Strawberry reacts as they aren't trading rookies, Larry. I don't know. There's no rule against it. I will say that. I know what you're saying. There is no rule against it. I did look that up this week because I had been saying, hey, how about this rookie? How about that rookie? And I just wanted to make sure that there is no rule against it. There is indeed no rule against trading rookies. Blood Moon says Krug trading a premium player back. It's either Minka or Freiermuth along with a pick, second round pick. 49ers have thought spending big money on wide receiver, then get tight end. He's saying Pat Freiermuth. What about Darnell Washington? Darnell Washington's a big-bodied tight end. You want a blocking tight end. You lost Charlie Warner. You want somebody who's an upgrade on Eric Sauerbert. How about him? Gigantic Georgia tight end. Might be good. Ricky Williams, the D-line needs to be addressed, Larry. When and how? Well, I'll say this. I was at camp last year, and I could see right away that they were too thin on the defensive line. And I've been there this year, and they're only slightly deeper this year. So get ready for a parade of defensive linemen coming through Santa Clara. It's going to happen. Actually, by the way, it's already happened. Let me give you the latest. The 49ers today are signing ex-Charger defensive tackle Nick Williams. So Nick Williams is the latest, but they're going to be adding defensive linemen, I would say, consistently for the rest of the year, just because you can never have enough. There'll be guys who go down with injuries, and just as simple as that. You can never have enough. One of the trades that I saw today that I thought was really an exciting trade, which would not make the Steelers fans happy because it didn't involve the Steelers. It was a Bleacher Report trade. Now, this is an interesting trade. Now, it doesn't involve the Steelers, and there's no indication that this is actually a real trade. But it's the Niners dealing with the New York Jets. And it's the Jets getting Aiyuk. Now, I don't know if the Jets would get Aiyuk and then flip him to the Raiders for Devontae, because the talk all summer is that, Rodgers and Devontae want to re-up their bromance and, get together in, at MetLife this year. But the trade was the Jets get Aiyuk, the Niners would get Hassan Reddick, the Jets' second-round pick next year, and Malachi Corley, the rookie receiver from Western Kentucky. You know what? Of all the trades I've heard, I think that's the best one. Because the Niners do need an edge rusher. Now, Hassan Reddick's got the same problem that Herbig has, same problem that Highsmith has. He's small. He's not a 275-pound guy. He's kind of small. But Hassan Reddick definitely is speed off the edge. And he would help their pass rush. You get a second-round pick, and you get Malachi Corley, who in a lot of ways is, they say, a very similar guy to Debo. Corley, a lot of people think is going to be a sleeper. A lot of people like him. Steve Smith did a great video on him before the draft. Really, really likes Malachi Corley. So that's a Bleacher Report trade, and there's no indication that this trade has even been discussed. It's just, internet gossip, so I'm just throwing out internet gossip. But as far as internet gossip goes, Aiyuk to the Jets for Hassan Reddick, a second-round pick next year, and Malachi Corley, I'd do that. I'd absolutely do that. To me, that sounds better than some of these other trades, to be completely honest. All right, that's going to do it for us. I think we've gone over an hour now, and I just wanted to thank all you guys. It was great. Thanks to Kev for chasing down Andrew Fillipponi. Thanks to Andrew Fillipponi for jumping on. You can catch him on 93.7 The Fan out of Pittsburgh. He's a great follow at the Pony Express on X. I don't know that we really advanced this at all, but it was good dialogue, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully we get a conclusion soon. But it is interesting that that for whatever reason, Aiyuk seems like he wants, if you believe Antonio Brown, that he really wants to be a Steeler. He doesn't want to be a 49er anymore. So that's interesting. And if that's the case, I'd get him out of there. But I'd also make sure I get what I want, because you're setting a terrible precedent. So if you're going to set a terrible precedent where you're trading guys who just say, you know what, I know I've got a 5th-year option contract, but you know what, I think I just want more, and I think I'd like to be elsewhere. And then you have to kowtow to them. If you're going to bow to this and set this terrible precedent, at least get a decent return. If you get, once again, Brandon Aiyuk's a great player. If you get a great player in return, Niner fans will be fine. Niner fans will understand. If you get ripped off and you trade Brandon Aiyuk and he becomes some awesome player for the Steelers and they go on, win a couple championships, and your Super Bowl window closes and you get nothing in return, then yeah, you're going to have problems. People are going to be complaining about Lynch and Shanahan. And you're popular now, but the fans will turn. The fans will turn. So to me, the latest reports were the Steelers may not trade any players and it may just be draft picks. Even that is okay as long as you could turn draft picks into Cortland Sutton, T. Higgins, Devontae Adams, Jordan Addison, somebody who could help you this year. Because this is the only Super Bowl you can win this year. And I don't know that Pearsall and Cowing can be leaned on. I was hopeful at the beginning of camp, but my big question all spring with those two guys was questions about their durability. And what has been the issue in camp? Durability. So at this point, I like Conley. I like a lot of these other guys. But if the Niners really feel they need a receiver, I totally understand why. Because Pearsall and Cowing have not been able to stay healthy. So anyway, I wish that wasn't the case, but that has been the case to this point. All right, that's going to do it for us. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube. Peace.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful.